Hi everyone. Just waiting for people to join. Nice to see some familiar faces.
Hi. I know. Hello, Nai. Hello, Dominic. Oh, wow. It's going to be many familiar faces. Oh, lovely. Elizabeth, hello. Richard, Millen, hello. Amanda Sterling, hello.
Hey.
Oh, Marcel and Tessa, lovely. Wow. Brilliant. Okay, so Diane is in now. Tom and Shanti, hello. Manzar, brilliant. Okay. Mercedes and Peter, hello. Helen DeWitt, wonderful. Welcome. Oh, there's Matthew and Marta, fantastic. Steve Polta, wow, hello. Very warm welcome. Great.
Yeah, hi. Hi everyone.
Audience. Okay, Sophia, I'm going to let you go.
Yeah, well, hello. Hi everyone. Thanks for joining. Just letting in final people, but we'll get started. So my name's Safia. I'm the Arts and Events Coordinator at Beau Arts. Hopefully you can all see and hear us okay. And welcome to this virtual Q&A with filmmaker Cecelia Condit and filmmaker and curator Kamila Kuc. So just a bit of digital housekeeping before we start. If you could all keep yourselves on mute, just throughout the whole session, that will stop any noise interference or anything like that. That'd be great. And then you can have your cameras on or off. Obviously, it'd be lovely to see your faces. We can already see lots of familiar faces. But yeah, that's completely up to you. We have the chat box available, so I'll pop a little message in there saying hello. Feel free to use the chat box throughout the whole session, just with any comments or questions, or even just to tell us where you're tuning in from tonight, because we have an international audience. So we are recording this session just for archiving purposes. So only the speakers will be recorded unless you decide to ask a question as an audience member. This is a public event, so your Zoom name and picture or video will be visible to all attendees, and as well as anything you share in the chat box. So that's all the boring stuff. Just for those of you who don't know Beau Arts, we are primarily an artist studios provider. So we have 13 studio sites across East and Southeast London, and over 300 practicing artists under our roof. We also have a learning department who work with artist educators in local schools. And then we have the Nunnery Gallery, which is our main public space for exhibitions and events. So we host about 3 to 4 exhibitions per year in the gallery, and we tend to focus on East London and the history of our local area. But we also particularly try to give a platform to emerging artists, which is where Visions comes in. So established in 1999, Visions is Beau Arts' biennial exhibition of moving image, digital and performance art, and it's selected from an international open call. This year, our lead artists were Hetain, Patel, Thompson and Benedict, who all guide the themes of the exhibition's 3 unique programmes. A big thanks to Arts Council England for supporting the show, and this year's selectors Tessa Garland, Sophie Hill and Kamila Kuc, together with the lead artists. So all of the works from Programme 1 and Programme 2 are now available to watch online, so you can head over to Beau Arts' YouTube channel to find those. And the Nunnery Gallery will be reopening next week, Wednesday the 2nd of December. So if any of you are in London, then do pop by and see us. So like I said, any questions or comments in the chat box, and we'll try to get to those throughout the session, but any burning questions at the end that you'd like to ask yourself, we'll have some time for questions from the audience. So you'll be able to give me a wave or a comment in the chat box, and you can unmute yourself and ask a question to one of our lovely speakers. So now I will pass over to Kamila to introduce herself and our lovely guests.
Hey, thank you, Sophia, and thank you to everyone for being here tonight on a Friday evening. We've got a lovely audience of over 99 people from what we saw, so welcome everybody, international audience. So as Sophia mentioned, I'm a filmmaker and curator, and it's been my great pleasure to be part of Visions in Nunnery this year and choose the fantastic works alongside Sophie Hill, Tessa Garland, and the Board staff. And it's of course a great honor to be in conversation with Cecelia Condit tonight, whose work I greatly admire. So I'm just going to introduce Cecilia. That's way too brief, because if I were to introduce Cecilia properly, I think I'll be reading 10 pages here. But for over 4 decades, Cecilia's films have been often described as feminist fairy tales and have explored sexuality, friendships, abuse, and aging. To me, I view a lot of Cecilia's works as protests against violence towards women and more recently the natural environment. Cecilia has shown her work at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, Pompidou Center, as well as many, many, many international film festivals. And for over 30 years, she ran a graduate program at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. Cecilia, it's been a great joy for me to revisit your work in the last couple of weeks as I was preparing for this conversation. And thank you so much for being with us tonight and for sharing your work. So I'll just say welcome, and if you want to say a couple of words to our audiences.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to see faces that I know and faces that I don't. So thank you so much.
Okay, I also want to welcome a couple more people, and that's Diane Messinger, calling in from Cape Cod under the name Bill. Hello, Diane, she's just waved, yes. So Diane's paintings featuring Cecilia's work, We're Hardly More Than Children, and Diane's story provides a fabric for the film. And I'm hoping that I will be able to invite Diane to a conversation at the right moment. And with us is also a composer for Cecilia's latest film, I've Been Afraid, Isaac Sherman. I think he's in. I don't see him yet, but Isaac, if you are here, welcome. And again, I'll sort of, oh, hello, here's Isaac. Hi. Hello, welcome. So I'll bring you into a conversation once we get to I've Been Afraid. So Cecilia has made many, many wonderful films, but for the purpose of this event, I've chosen 3 films, largely because those films were made different times, or not the last 2, but certainly possibly in Michigan, but they more importantly represent to me extent of Cecilia's practice, both in terms of her experiments with narrative, but also a moving image form. So I think tonight's event, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're going to run for about 70 to 75 minutes. And I'll begin by asking a few questions of my own, and then I'll open to the audiences. That said, if any of you have any burning questions while Cecilia and I are on a particular subject, please feel free to raise your hand or type it in the chat, and then we can bring that question in. Okay, Cecilia, are you ready?
Yes.
Yes, yes. Okay, so let's start chronologically. Let's start with your classic piece, possibly in Michigan, made in 1984, which you've yourself described as a musical murder story, which I very much like. And in the film, I'm sure all of you have seen the films, but in the film, there's this story of a cannibal called Arthur, who follows 2 women in a shopping mall, Sharon and Janice. And as he follows the 2 women back to their home, he eventually gets killed and eaten by the 2 women. I feel very compelled to mention that recently this piece has been viewed by hundreds of thousands of new viewers, and of course picked up by a young generation of TikTok users. And the hashtag possibly in Michigan had 12 million views on TikTok last year in November, when I think it was around the same time, this time right now, when the New York Times article about you came out, Cecilia, right? It was November last year, I think. Yeah, but that was 12 million views on TikTok by that point. So I think now we're probably, you know, higher than that. And the film is currently also on display on Goswell Road in Paris, alongside many of its TikTok reworks, right? And you, Cecilia, have been recently in a wonderful conversation with Sabrina Tarasov at Goswell Road, which I hope many of you will be able to see online soon. So I'm getting to my question. So Cecilia, on different occasions, we've discussed the writings of a particular writer, Rebecca Solnit.
Yes.
And in her latest book, which we also discussed briefly, Recollections of My Non-Existence, Rebecca Solnit says that as a young woman in the 1980s, there we go, mine is upstairs. As a young woman in the 1980s, she was trying not to be the subject of someone else's poetry and not to get killed. She also says she was trying to find a poetics of her own, with no maps, no guides, and no much to go on. In one of your interviews, you described your 20s as a war zone. Can you tell us more about the context in which you made, possibly in Michigan? And I'm thinking here about, of course, the origins of the film, but I'm also thinking about you establishing your footing in video art as opposed to film, and of course about feminism and what it meant to you at the time.
I made possibly in Michigan and Beneath the Skin in response to like what I felt like I lived through a war zone. I mean, I know that when Rebecca Solnit talks about it, she's talking about growing up in the, as a young adult in the 80s, while I was a young adult in the 70s. And I feel like the world has changed a lot in that it is not so very rough. But when I talk to young friends of mine, they tell me, oh, they look at me like I must be out of my mind. So I notice that there are things that are still going on today that are, but I think I particularly was drawn to a certain destructive quality that I couldn't help. I mean, I didn't know I was, or else I would have, if I had labeled it and called it a name, I would have been able to have managed much better. But I didn't do that. I just was trying to figure out. And as Rebecca Solnit says, there was no guideposts. And so it was difficult being a woman who felt like they were trying to find a voice, really just plain trying to figure out what to even discuss, right? Other than my own personal experience. And when I made Possibly in Michigan, I wasn't making it as a feminist fairy tale. I was making it because I had so much anger in me and I had to figure out what to do with it. And I did this one film, Beneath the Skin, and I thought that that should be enough because it's a pretty gruesome murder story, which was true. But I found I wasn't really able to get rid of it. So when I started Possibly, I didn't know, I wasn't planning to do a piece on cannibals. I mean, that would really, that would not have done. But I mean, I would not have gone out looking to make a piece on cannibals. Was too much of a good girl for that. You know, I was trying to be visible. I wasn't trying to be bad and weird. I was trying just to make myself so that I could look at myself and I could go through the world and people would look at me and I'd have a voice or be seen or heard or something like that. But Possibly eventually as I went along, Possibly became about cannibalism. But I used a number of different stories. And since Diane, who is under Bill's name, she had a dream. Dreams are a part of some of my work. But she had a dream, Diane Messinger, who's you'll talk to later. She had a dream when she had been really brutally raped. And again, it was my friend Diane, but it wasn't me that was brutally raped, but it has this impact when you have this incredibly close connection. And so I actually had a hard time recovering from first this illegal abortion, which we'll talk about later, but also when she was really brutally raped when she was a young girl, and she stayed with me for 6 months afterwards because she was recovering. That the first night in the hospital when I called her to see, Diane, can I talk about this? I hope she can hear. Oh, it's okay. Later. But she had this dream where she said, he said, you have two choices. One, I'll eat you now, or two, I'll cut your arms and legs off and eat them slowly. And she asked why, and he said for love. And so I just took Diane's dream, which of course she doesn't remember, and I put it dead center to Possibly. And then I met a woman who had dated a cannibal in Ohio, and I was living in Ohio at the time. So it seemed to me that I needed some glue in the narrative, and I didn't want to have it be just like silly. Like I thought about making them eat cookies that looked like Arthur, and I didn't do that. I just thought cannibalism seems about right? Because it's brutal. And I started thinking that between Karen and Jill Sands, Karen Skladany, who did the music, and Jill Sands, who is a long dark haired gal, that the three of us really had enough to talk about that could handle that kind of talk.
Right, because for Beneath the Skin, you're actually dealing directly with your own experience of having dated somebody who had killed another woman, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Could you talk about that a little bit? Because I think some of it seems like it filtered through possibly in Michigan too.
Yes, it filters through. It actually, part of the war zone that I experienced in my 20s had to do with murder. And it also had to do with rape, and it had to do with my friends, and it had to do with my community of people. And I think I was very susceptible because I really had questions about who I was. So I was, I don't think that's unusual. I think women have, men today, I guess, have questions about who they are. But as a woman back then, I think the question really loomed fairly large.
Mm-hmm. And maybe can we talk a little bit about your choice of video, because you've described many times that for you the video aesthetics was perfect for fairy tales. You described the particular qualities of video, like the whites in video appearing very pink and pretty, or else you also said that you would never use video for night news, which is what it was mostly used for, and why I think in particular artists probably look down upon it. And I just wondered to what degree did the medium of video itself influence the form of your early work, in particular possibly in Michigan? Yeah.
Yeah, well, both Beneath the Skin and possibly in Knowledge of the Sun, they all were influenced by this video. I could pick up a camera, and even though it was hardly portable, I mean, it didn't strike me as portable, it struck me as heavy, but it was amazingly free. And I felt like I didn't have all the baggage of history, which film had for me. Even at that young age, I thought that it had baggage, and a lot of it felt like it was men. And since I didn't know what I was saying, and I hadn't seen very much video art, I mean, I was very, I was fairly isolated at that point. Now I have a much more of a handle on things, but that is not what was once. Once I felt that I feel like I'm still sort of an outsider to art, and I can't help it. I experienced that in that if I had felt for myself to be somebody who was more mainstream, I couldn't have done a piece on cannibalism. I couldn't have done so much work on murder and violence against women.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But video was freeing because you could basically, once you could take a camera and you just turn it on and you can get together with a couple of your girlfriends and make a video. It's very freeing. It didn't cost money. It didn't do anything. I just had to get access to it. And that became very freeing. And then later, when video cameras became pocketbook size, that was another really freeing moment. Felt like part of the feminist revolution. But I could do things wherever I wanted to, and so I could. Shopping mall.
Right. Speaking of feminism, you did mention in your interview with Sabrina Tarasov, I think, that at the time you were trying feminism on as a dress.
Would you say that again?
That in your interview with Sabrina Tarasov recently, you did describe feminism as having tried it on as a dress at the time. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I tried it on. Well, I think I did. I mean, at the time, I didn't know that's what I was talking about. But as soon as I was finished it, I knew I had tried this on in a serious way.
How did it fit?
It fit. Well, it really fit. Yeah, it fit. Kamila, it fit. After that, I knew what I was making work, that regardless if I had planned to make it feminist, because that's not politically something that I could actually somehow do, but it became something that I knew that people would look at me that way. And so it fit. And you can't argue with people who write about you. I mean, you can, but you don't, it just seems like ridiculous, because that's also their creative way of looking at the work. And so I don't know, I think that was important for me to realize early on that writers actually teach you something about yourself that you don't know. And I feel like I've been lucky to have people who are really remarkable write on my work.
Yes, and they continue to write, right? The articles are coming out every week. Okay, so I just want to ask you a couple more questions about possibly in Michigan, and I'm thinking here about the film not boldly attacking the idea of toxic masculinity, but also projecting images of women as agents of change, and not only narratively speaking. And I was wondering, what were the original reactions to the film when it came out, and what were your thoughts on those reactions? Because I
Well,
think you did say that at some point I think you received the National Endowment for the Arts funding, and people were protesting against you receiving that funding because of the themes of your work.
yeah, Pat Robertson from the Christian Broadcast Network, he took a snippet of possibly in Michigan where this leg was being cut off with a butter knife and put somebody's words about cutting Jesus or something. And it was really serious. I never saw it. I just know what I was heard and what I heard from people. But it had a reaction that I didn't anticipate. I think possibly has been one of those stories that you can make and you never anticipate. I could have never imagined. In fact, when I started getting so many views on YouTube for the summer before last, when TikTok came out, I didn't have an idea what was going on. And it wasn't until actually somebody from France wrote me, Danny, wrote me, Ashura wrote me saying, like, hey, you know, you got TikTokers all over you. And I didn't understand it. And the same thing happened when it was on the front page of Reddit for a week, possibly a snippet that just said, the creepiest film I've ever seen. And then I thought, like, well, it is, but I didn't make it to be creepy. I made it because this is genuinely how I experienced my world, as really, really strange.
And why do you think it was possibly in Michigan, not beneath the skin, for example, that was picked up by the TikTok gang?
Oh, I think there's a certain ambiguity about, I mean, the story about beneath the skin has lots of, I mean, like if you look at views, you know, which I try not to do, at least I try to do it every couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, to see what's going on. No, and also because some people write and sometimes they write things that I think I should respond to. I mean, I think I try to do things like that. But what were you asking me,
I was
Kamila?
asking, why do you think it was possible? Why, in your opinion, it was possibly in Michigan that was picked up by the
Oh,
TikTok
oh,
users?
well, in the beginning, people thought I was gay. And that was something that I thought was very reasonable for that time, right? And also, I don't know, and people don't know it, but I play Arthur in it. So I'm sort of dressing as this thug, this creepy old guy, young guy, I guess it is, with his mouth continually open, ready to eat anybody who's in his path. It's yeah, so I think there's magic, and also it's a narrative. So it has actors and the story goes along. And I think that makes a lot of difference. And it's about horror. And I think that people today are young people, are afraid. I mean, I'm afraid. So it doesn't surprise me if I was starting out in this land of trying to be visible. What in the world would you do? It's hard to do this. But I think that they're afraid enough so that they really are trying to figure out in this horror that they see in front of them what they do. And also, I mean, people, I think it's an interesting piece. I mean, like there's a part of me that goes like, I can't resent it, because if I resented it, my website, which, you know, has a lot of viewers, I mean, it's what brings it in. And then there's people that go through everything. So once, because I know what the algorithm does on YouTube, right? Because I'm not in control of it. I mean, TikTok sent them to YouTube, and so when things went to YouTube, YouTube became part of the used possibly as an algorithm, so that anybody who looked like they were 10 and above, or in that 20 range, that could be, you know, just a liberal or crazy or weird, or not weird, just
Yeah.
they got sent this, and when they watched that, then they were sent another piece, so that the list of recommendeds just went on and on and on and on. And that made a lot of difference.
Right. Well, I'm very happy that the piece has been so successful because it's so iconic. And I think, you know, I've been teaching it for a couple of years now, and the reactions of the students range. And I think, I believe we have a couple of my former students, the Goldsmiths, practitioners in their own right, Nivedita and Andrew. So later I would love to perhaps hear from you. And you've already met Nivedita anyway, who's wrote a brilliant essay about your work, and Chris Krause's, Chris Krause's Aliens and Anorexia, I think it was. Anyway, okay. So I'm going to move on to We Were Hardly More Than Children, because I do want to leave some time for the audiences to ask questions. So the film was made in 2019. It won an award at the Arbor Film Festival, I believe. And it's a poignant depiction of your memory of a particular night back in 1969 when your friend Diane had an illegal abortion and almost died. And it's, of course, it's a story about abortion, but it's also a story about friendship. And the film uses Diane Messinger's wonderfully expressive paintings. And it ends with an intriguing line. I was always very intrigued when I first read that line. And the line reads, Diane Messinger's paintings express the anger she doesn't feel and the hurt she doesn't remember. And I just wondered, I hope Diane can enter the conversation, because I know the connection was bad there. But I was wondering, Diane, can you hear us?
You can't hear?
No, I think she can hear us. Okay, well, welcome in any case, but I'm gonna have to let Cecilia answer this question, but my question to you, Diane, also, in this case, it will be a question to Cecilia.
I can hardly understand you. Can you understand me?
No, Diane, I'm sorry, we can't hear you very well. Yeah, so I think I'm gonna pose the question to Cecilia. Cecilia, what was Diane's reaction to your original idea of wanting to make a film about your own experience of the night of your friend having had an illegal abortion?
Well, first of all, I had to ask her if I could use the story, and she said, certainly you can use the story, you just don't identify it with me.
Right.
So then I made this piece that didn't identify her at all. And then by the end of the piece, she said I could use her story. And then I went, my God, I just made a piece about it. I never would have made it, would have been very different. First of all, Diane would have been in it. It would have been a different feel to it.
Right,
And
because in a film I'm sorry to interrupt, but in a film Diane is actually played by an actress who had appeared in your previous films, and she has a fictional name, Lena, right?
Yeah, Lena, I made a different name. So it's,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure that it's worse for wear, for having that ambiguity. I'm not sure, do you know, that there's all so much that's made up and it's real in my work, you know, like there's just, I feel like it's not like I lie, I never lie, but I can make things up, or, it's just like, I feel like a piece, I force myself to make a piece. I try to force myself to make a certain piece, and it doesn't, it seems like it has its own mind, and you just make it and you sculpt it however you can, the way it seems to want to go.
But I think your pieces are very successful in revealing something that I think, as an artist, I'm also often after something that I call affective truth. So it might not be necessarily factual truth. So the facts might not necessarily line up and the dates might be wrong, but the feeling is real.
The feeling
of that's, I think, what we're really talking about. And I think that piece is definitely doing that. So I think my question, I suppose, to you, Cecilia, would be, what made you decide to revisit this event in this particular moment in time? So last year, although you've probably been making this film for a while, but.
Well, it's because I can hardly believe that it's still such an issue, right? When you think of your home country, Poland, Kamila,
right? Yes.
Have abortions anymore. I mean, and I think the reason that I found Diane's story so challenging was because she could have died so many times that night by different hands. The doctor, our friend who told to call him in the morning, the woman who was in the hospital who didn't want to sign her name. She couldn't sign her name. She wasn't allowed in. The doctors themselves who reached out, if I hadn't been there that night, there's just so many things that were really difficult. But I feel like, in spite of the fact that it was very difficult, I mean, it had that story. I mean, it sounds like, I'm being like, we talk about humor and stuff. I feel like I was trying to be pretty, a little humorous in that, right? Because it was such a heavy story. But I mean, sometimes, you know, like I have these little arms that cling together and little
Or a
chairs.
leg of lamb,
Yeah, yeah,
which we'll get to later, hopefully.
yeah. So there's like little things, but actually after that, when I was, I until I was about 26, that's like 70 years. I had nightmares of blood every single night, fields of blood, flooding blood, just, you know, it's very hard to get. I don't know how people who are in war, you know, can do it, or people who get raped too and who are really brutally raped. I don't know how in the world that people really recover, because I wasn't the one whose life was in danger, and yet I was. I think that like 7 years of nightmares with blood flooding landscapes and no one to trust and no guideposts. I think that constitutes terror and trauma.
Yeah, I think one of my
story.
yeah, no, I completely sympathize with that. I think one of my questions to you, which I sort of kept for later, but perhaps I'll ask right now, is that of course, dreams play a very important part in your work, and there are certain films of yours, which is starting from Beneath the Skin or Rapunzel or Annie Lloyd, where you mention dreams very directly. You either say, I had a dream, or my friend had a dream, or my mother had a dream. And I suppose you answered that to some extent, but I am curious in how you sort of negotiate this relationship between a dream and waking life, and how does this raw energy of dream really inform your sort of creation of the narrative, and how, in terms of your process, and how you begin, where you begin with dreams. Yeah.
It's very important to me. I mean, I use other people's dreams, you know, like I think in one film I say, this woman says, I had this dream I think belonged to you. And that one time I was like, really, I wasn't exactly psychic, but I was something serious. You know, like I used to see people walking around. Diane was telling me just this morning when we talked on the phone that I would see people walking around my apartment all the time. And she would say, are you scared? And I go, no, there seem to be very sensible people. But I mean, there's like a whole lot of this business of dream and overlap and how you like negotiate it. As an artist, you know, I felt like at one time I was pretty crazy. And I felt that as an artist, I had the liberty to be as crazy as I wanted to be, because I could make work that was, you know, about craziness, and nobody would hold it against me just because I wasn't as stable as I am now. Right? I mean, I have this line that I keep wanting to put in a piece. If I had known who I'd become or who I might become, I wouldn't have tried so hard to throw myself away.
Right. Well, hope you will make it to your next film. But I just wanted to return for a couple of more minutes for We Were Hardly More Than Children. And I suppose, again, that was my question to both of yourself and Diane. But as someone who was at the front line before abortion was made legal across the US, and looking at the rise of authoritarian governments now, and of course the current debate about abortion, which also continues in America. And as you mentioned, we talked about it, my country, Poland, is facing near total abortion ban, and Poland is, you know, now witnessing the largest protest since communism against that ban. I suppose I'm curious, what is this debate about to you right now? The debate about abortion in America, because we know it's not just about abortion, right? Or it isn't really about abortion itself.
Well, I think that people have to take responsibility for their lives, and abortion is one of the ways you take responsibility for your life. So I can't imagine. I wouldn't have done a piece about it if I felt there was any question in my mind that this was something that one had to. Also, Diane would have died. I mean, you know, when she, you know, like the question of abortion or not, I mean, we were not stable back then as much as we could have been. You know, it wasn't an easy life to negotiate.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think being a woman really is. I mean, I tell you, I talk to these young friends of mine and they keep saying, looking at me and they go like, yeah, it's easier than it was, maybe. Right?
But I'm thinking, of the current context, and I think you've read that book too. Many of you probably have. I have it at the back here. I put it here deliberately. Rage Becomes Hair, right?
Yes.
When you really talk about, sort of abortion being very much about, of course, controlling it being an ideological struggle over the position of women and whether women have the right to decide over their bodies, over what they're supposed to do. And of course, wonderful Katha Pollitt, the Nation's writer, has written extensively on that subject. So I'm thinking, that you must be feeling doubly furious that we sort of come in the full circle, and now we're back in 2020. We're back in a situation where we're still debating that, because that's what I think we're really debating, right?
I think it's true. I find it shocking. Well, I have a lot of anger. I'm always going to have anger. I can't help it. I simply do. And it's fine, right?
Yeah, it's completely fine.
You can't help it. It isn't that I don't have a whole world in me that I live around that is, like the loveliest, most normal world in the world. It's
Right.
just lovely. I create a loving place for myself and I live in it. I'm most content here. And then once in a while, like something like comes out from the past and just gives me a tweak. And I'm suddenly in the land of, you know, at least discomfort, maybe anger, maybe fear, maybe something that I didn't know was important. But I did think that we were hardly more than children, which I had told in my mind many times because I didn't tell it out loud because it was an illegal thing and I didn't want to go to jail. I didn't want to have that kind of a problem. But I didn't want to have that kind of. But I was surprised at how it impacted me. It affected Diane too. But Diane's paintings, which are quite wonderful, they're all about women. They look at each other, they don't look at each other. Like, what do they say if they were standing there? You wonder, like, I keep wanting to put conversations in their mouths.
Right, right.
What they say. But yeah, but the abortion was surprisingly how horrible and angry it made me at the end. That's one of the reasons I did I've Been Afraid, because I didn't want to be afraid anymore. It wasn't
Right.
just because of abuse. It was because I just didn't want to live in a world where I had to be afraid. I just refused.
Well, that seems like a good moment to perhaps move on to I've Been Afraid, and we'll return to We're Hardly More Than Children. I'm sure there'll be questions. But so to me, your latest piece, I've Been Afraid, it seems like a ticking bomb that sort of brings together your long-term explorations of individual, societal, and institutional violence towards women. It's also a film that's probably most eclectic in form from your works, at least that's how I've experienced it. And there's a computer generated imagery, there's archival footage, there's also excerpts from your previous work in a film. And it seems to me that the film is very much in an open dialogue with all the women that have experienced forms of domestic abuse. And I just wondered, because while you were making the film, I think that's when the TikTok exposure began happening. And I wondered whether the TikTok exposure in any way has influenced the shape and form of the I've Been Afraid.
Oh, I think it had something to do with it. I don't know
Right.
what, I don't know how. Like sometimes you do things and you don't really know what you're doing. But I do feel that when I wrote there's some little lines in there that go, I've been afraid of foxes. I've been afraid of ticks and toxins. I've been afraid of what you might do. I've been afraid I might kill you. And that was a line. When I said that, I went, man, there's no holding back on this one. That was really serious. And it was very early in the piece. So I really suspect that if people are going to watch it, that's where they turn it off. Right.
Well, you've got that wonderful witty reference directly to TikTok in the film.
And another thing where a friend of mine was telling me, because I have these friends, they always tell stories. Since I tell stories and they tell stories too, but it was about TikTok. She says that she would play with her baby, and while she would play, her husband would sit in his chair and he would say, tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. And she didn't know what he would do, but he would count down until he decided when to do it. And she would just have to sit back and wait. And that really scared me. So it could be days, and of course, maybe it would be nothing, maybe it would be nothing. But because of the nature of abuse is that anything could happen. And of course, people who are abused will say, oh, it wasn't that bad. You know, it could have been worse. And so they go, oh, it's fine. Could have been worse. But it could have been worse. Oh, whoa. I mean, it's big stuff when you have to live your life saying, well, it could have been worse. It wasn't so bad.
Right, but you think, were you thinking when you were making the film, were you thinking of trying to perhaps address younger audiences, or particularly younger women? Or, you know, I'm thinking of the TikTok gang again. That
yeah, I may have thought that. I had been interviewing women who had been abused by their partners.
Mhm.
And I found their stories so heavy. And also, if I was thinking about making narratives or like part different things, but I could not bear to have the women hurt in this film. I couldn't bear to do a reenactment where the women would be hurt in a film, even if it was a woman who had never been hurt in her life.
Mm.
I don't think I could do that to them. I thought it would leave them vulnerable maybe forever and ever. So I stopped, and then I started playing with my cell phone, and that was a great joy. So I came up with these little emojis and things like that, and some of them I could see when I put that little house in, that shack. That was really powerful for me because you have to isolate a person to get them to be a victim. You have to have certain controls, and so the house and the doors and the windows, and then a whole house, all like the whole little community of houses with those doors shut and moving around in that piece, for me, was really powerful. You have to be able to shut the door, and you have to isolate your victim. If you have a lot of people running through, you can't abuse a person.
Right, you keep anticipating my questions. But that's fine. The home pops up in my next question. But I just wanted to return quickly to your research, your process of then interviewing women who have been abused. And did you start from your circle of friends, or like how did that happen? And
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I started from my circle of friends, which is pretty amazing, right? So I had some friends. Well, it was also a community I had. You know, it wasn't because anybody knew anything. I didn't know someone. I was at this fundraiser, and a friend of mine asked me to go. So I'm wearing a ball gown. I felt really quite charming. I sit down talking to this woman, and she started telling me, you know, like she was married for a long time, but her husband was really scary. And I'm sitting there looking at her like, I can't escape this. So then I started realizing I have to figure out something, because everywhere I turn, there's someone who's been abused. So I interviewed her, and she's an artist, and she's a really excellent artist here in Wisconsin. And she was telling, it's her story, which when her ex-husband died, that he said, I thought I'd be the death of you. And, you know, she said, yeah, I thought so too.
There's some brilliant lines in the film, like they are in all of your films, and I think I'll return to that. But can I ask you a question about this house in the woods? You know, I've been afraid. There is this motif of a house that's a little animation. And this motif of a house keeps appearing in your work. It's been in Rapunzel, of course, Annie Lloyd, and many others. And I just wondered if, in any way, is this a reference to your childhood home?
Yeah.
How far do ideas really go back with you?
Oh, they go far back. Well,
Right.
you know, I was talking with Diane the other day because I'm working on this piece, and the circles just go round and round, and I don't know what I'm doing, you know, and it's not letting me know what's going on, which is really annoying of it. Usually, you know, it gives me a clue. Nah, nothing. So I keep.
You'll dream about it one night, right?
I do dream that.
Yeah.
Because I do. Like I go to sleep, and then when I'm about ready to wake up, I find my mind is clear from my intentions. And so I can let things come to the surface. And so that's when I sort of like write lines. That's when I decide what needs to be done. But, you know, but it has its own mind. It isn't just me saying I'm going to do this, because it's not like I can't film. I mean, I can film. At this point, I make real nice looking work.
Yes, you certainly do. But so there is a reference to your childhood home in that film.
Oh yeah,
Could
sorry.
you talk a little bit about that?
I had a childhood home. In fact, Diane and I were talking about it this morning because she was going to be talking. Just her internet is terrible out on Blueberry Lane where she lives, and I thought that I don't know, the house. She was telling me the house was really strange, and it was, I think. it was in the woods and it was surrounded by creeks. And my mother didn't go out much. And there was no guidance. No, excuse me. There was nobody that really talked to you. So Diane was telling me today that I was really a feral child because she knew me when I was, and I went, yeah, I know. I start realizing that I really was. And when I would get confused and try to whitewash my story, because it's very easy to do that. I can do that really easily. I have so often said to people, well, you know, when you met our family, you probably were really surprised that things were not so crazy. And they all, it seems like people who knew them said, oh, well, I didn't think that, no. And but when I was a child, they sent me to school, you know, like how children go in school, except for that I was feral. And like nobody showed me how to use a fork, a new utensil. Nobody told me that if somebody wants to hold your hand, you should trust them if they're an adult teaching you know, your teacher. There was none of this. So I grabbed hold of this poor teacher's hand with my teeth and bit as hard as I possibly could. Yeah.
I see there's another piece in that, huh? It's going to make it into another film.
I feel so sad about it. I just feel like I remember it so clearly. And she went to the hospital and I bit to the bone, the poor darling.
Oh dear. Okay, maybe Isaac Sherman is going to save us from this one, huh?
Yeah.
Let's talk about sound in I've Been Afraid. Sound is, of course, like in all of your films, so important. And I've got more questions about that, but at some point I want to open it to the audiences. But sounds particularly distinct in this piece of work, and it gives the film a very catchy music video quality, at least to me, and that's a high compliment because I love music videos. The songs in your work, of course, in general, do not function just as a background sound. They're very important. They form the fabric of the film, and they, of course, also move the narrative along. And I think that's also one of the unique parts of your work to me. But can you talk in some detail about how you work with songwriting and how you work with composers? And then Isaac, if you could talk a little bit about what your process of working with Cecilia was, because is this the first time you two work together?
Yes, I was lucky. I was lucky. Don't you think I was lucky? He's really can make a nice rhythm. I don't know. There you are, Isaac. I just loved it. I loved it from the very beginning. I'm hoping to do it again. You know, I would like to, but I knew that I started writing. I didn't know what I was doing, so I decided I should make it a song, and so I started writing. So I gave it to Isaac, and right away he came up with this little tune. Right away, wasn't it? Right away, Isaac.
It was right away.
Right away, you know, you sat down the next day, I had this little tune. It was so cute and charming. I've been afraid of being.
Well, it's very catchy. I was singing it for like days and days after I first saw the film, and I still do. It's like, you know, I think it will stay with me forever. Yeah. So okay. So Cecilia, you first wrote the words for the song. The song came
Yes,
first.
I was still in the progress. It was in progress when I gave the words I had to Isaac, so it wasn't finished. You know, it was hard to decide whether to put TikTok. I mean, there's TikTok, boom. Like for that, the story, that was always going to be in there, that story. But in terms of the words for the songs, Isaac would just change it as I would go along, you know. And then it was like changing like where the verses were. Right, Isaac?
Right. Yeah. So do you want us to talk about the process of that?
Please,
okay.
Please do, yes.
Yeah, so I mean, well, thanks for having me here. I'm so honored to be a part of this conversation. This was such a fun project to work on because Cecilia, as everybody here knows, is such a creative and free thinker. And so the way that this started was, Cecilia, you brought me the words that you were working on, and you said, I hope I'm not throwing you under the bus, but you said you wanted it a mix between Dolly Parton and Billie Eilish. And so we tried to achieve some sort of connection there. And, you know, you sent me the words and I sent you back a couple of sounds that I was working on, and this had happened. We got started on this before coronavirus hit, and so we were working sort of a hybrid email and in person.
Right.
And so I would just send Cecilia a few stems of beats that I had, and she would say whether this worked or this didn't. And it was really great. I mean, this was the first time I think either of us had the first time that I had worked in this way of writing music from scratch for somebody's words for a film. And yeah, it was just a really interesting process of kind of back and forth. And we had a couple sessions in my studio at the time where we got to sit down together and record and figure out the melodies. And then the coronavirus hit, and we ended up finishing up this project remotely, just sending things back and forth. And Cecilia would record vocals at home, send them to me, and I would mix those in, and we kind of just, would piece this together with the images too. There was a bit of sort of rearranging the story as a whole, I think. Maybe you can speak more to that, Cecilia, how you felt about that.
Yeah, I think the big thing that happened, which was so mind-blowing for me, is when you put my voice on auto-tune.
The auto-tune.
What is it?
The auto-tune, yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was amazing. The auto-tune, I mean, once that was it, I looked like I could hear, I thought like I could sing, which I can't. So I just loved it. It was just like suddenly I hit, I think what it does is it gives a person who's not on a note sort of like a note it goes to the nearest note, I guess. Is that what it does? So suddenly I would not be flat for the first time in my life. So I loved how I sound. So I started being able to be kind of free as I sang, because I knew it didn't matter if I hit the notes or not. Isaac could miraculously make me in tune. It was
well, I thought Cecilia has a great voice, everybody.
Right.
She wouldn't agree, but I didn't think that you needed the auto-tune. We just tried it because it gives it more of that pop music effect. And, I think it just sounded great, and it was, it worked, so we kept it.
Yeah.
It seemed like it worked really, really well. And Cecilia, you do have a great voice, and that voice does appear in a lot of your works too, as a voiceover and as a sing-song. Very often a sing-song voiceover. But
I have a lot of confidence in my voice over talking, not so much singing.
Well, great. Thank you for that, Isaac. I'm wondering, it's a good time perhaps to try and open to the audience for some questions. I imagine there will be some, but I just want to read something out here from Nuala O'Sullivan. Welcome, Nuala. Hi, from Women Over 50 Film Festival. Nuala is joining us from Walthamstow in London, East London. So yes, pretty local. And Nuala says that they've loved screening Cecilia's work for a number of years. And welcome, Cecilia. Welcome, Nuala. This is a really lovely gathering tonight. Okay, there's somebody here who's posted a question. Sukrai posted a question that this reminds me of Cecilia's film Pull Up Roots, but I think the conversation at the time was perhaps about the house in I've Been Afraid. I think that's where I first saw the comment. But is there anybody in the audience who would like to ask a question or two to Cecilia? Raise your hand or type in the chat. Otherwise, of course, I have more questions, but I think it would be lovely to hear from someone else.
Well, I used Pulling Up Roots was the first time I appeared besides Arthur, right?
Right. Well, so I do actually, one of my questions to you is about your physical presence in your work, because you are present physically in many of your films, and also, of course, you use the first person narration. And I just wondered what it means to you as a filmmaker to be sometimes simultaneously behind and in front of the camera.
Well, I think I like being in my work because I'm always free, and also I'm cheap. And that was something, I had kids in college, there's like all this stuff. Living is expensive. So that was one of the major reasons, right? that I started appearing in my work. But when I was in Ireland for Pulling Up Roots, which is one of my favorite pieces, is I got two gals. I was introduced to two sisters, and when one left, the other one came in for college. And yeah, they could shoot. I mean, they weren't majors; they were majoring in writing and stuff. But it made it so I could have looked for an older woman to play it, but I thought that perhaps in this particular case, it was terribly important that it should be me. You know, it might be terribly important that it was me talking about everything I was, I wasn't, and everything I am. You know, that I thought I should play it, and then I got kind of used to it.
Yeah, but you've been appearing in your work from quite early on. Like you said, you played Arthur possibly in Michigan, which we possibly couldn't know because you were wearing a costume. But yeah, okay. I suppose an obvious question to ask you really is about the use of humor in your work. And I think there's many different ways in which humor comes across in your work. It's through your sing-song voiceovers, through your words, through your writing. But it's also through juxtapositions between quite literal and sort of more free-willing associative imagery. And very often that imagery coupled with the sing-song voiceover then sort of results in this rather humorous effect to narratives that are in fact very dark. Of course, there's a reason why your work's been referred to as fairy tales and talked in the context of Brothers Grimm and all that, right? So I just wondered whether you could talk a little more about your process of working with humor and of course how important it is to you, and at which point in your work do you bring the humor, or do you really start from that?
Well, I think that humor is a very high level of intelligence. It strikes me as it's one of the highest forms of intelligence. So I didn't think I've had that much ability at it. I mean, it's not like sometimes I'm not funny, but sometimes I'm not funny. Sometimes I'm funny, but I felt like that was something that I had to work on. And so I couldn't imagine blurting out all this horror unless I sounded like I was at least a little believing and a little funny. I think that was something I sort of had to do. Otherwise, it would have been just impossible to make a piece also that I could work on. I have to be able to stomach what I'm doing too, because these pieces affect me.
Right. Okay, we've got a question from Andrew. Andrew, do you want to ask in person? I think it's yeah. So Andrew Phillip. Andrew is a filmmaker and also a theorist. And I think yes, I'd like to think I've introduced Andrew to your work by showing possibly in Michigan in my class at Goldsmiths, right?
Absolutely, and it's incredible. It's so great to hear you speak at length. It feels like a real honor to hear you speak. I just was wondering about your editing process, because am I right in thinking that you edit all your work? Mm-hmm. And just thinking in terms of from the earlier films, like possibly in Michigan, even though the image is poor, the editing is so slick. I think it's really slickly put together. And that kind of carries through all your work, and even the latest film, all, like the animations are kind of poor GIFs, but they're placed very slickly. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about, whether you have that edit in your head when you're shooting, or if a lot of the construction happens when you're in the edit suite.
Yeah, thank you. That was a good question. Andrew, what I try to do is that I try to get as much, to plan as much as I can. So I actually usually have some kind of a script or something, but I throw it away and then I add more to it and I throw it away. And, then it becomes what I think works there. You can't tell what's going to work. I can't, I think the work, work tells you what it has to be or what it wants to do. You just sort of sit there and wonder why, how this worked and how come this doesn't work and why is it not working? I've been trying so hard. Push, right? And I sometimes, but I know that I'm an editor. I can edit now, but the person who I worked with most now editing the last oh, I don't know, 7 years has been, no, more, what has been Jill Sands, who's the long dark haired gal. And so like what I'll do is I always ask my friends, can you take a look at it? You know, this is something that I do. I'm really big on it, bothering my friends. Like,
we all are. Andrew can testify.
Is that right? Well, you know, someone told me one time, and Judith is there laughing too. But someone told me, my boss told me once when I was in Cleveland, when I was living there and making possibly, that I'm smart, but I got really smart friends, and I do. You know, I'm smart, but I'm smart, but I've got really smart people that I know.
Yeah, I think, you know, that friends' feedback is crucial, isn't it, to particular stages of the work. Anyway, I think I couldn't do without my friends' feedback either. I think, and yourself including, Cecilia too, of course, because you and Andrew have been giving me feedback on my work too, and that I can't imagine not having, you know, moving forward with the work, releasing it to the world without receiving feedback from the people who you really trust, who can tell you that something doesn't work or something does work or whatever.
Well, you could be done. You could think you're done and you'd be the most naive person in the world.
Exactly.
And they tell you, hey, there's nothing here. You go,
right.
What?
Right. And I think, you know, what you're saying is that we've been lucky to be surrounded by people who can share that honesty and, of course, you know, invest that time to say that. Yes.
Yes,
yeah,
that's real.
okay.
It's real.
We've got a wonderful question from Nuala. Nuala, would you like to ask yourself, or shall I read it out? But do you want to ask yourself?
Hi, it's so nice to see you. My question is inspired by a tweet I saw today, and it was about some politician in the suffragettes' time who said that women's dresses should not have pockets because they'd only stuff them with leaflets. So this idea that pockets are very dangerous. So my question is, if feminism is your dress, what's in your pockets?
Oh, you're really.
Oh, what a question. Fabulous.
You see, I have it's strange, this piece that is not working. I have some dresses, which for me are this feminist statement. I mean, I know that I hardly wear dresses very much. I wear pants, but for me, it's like a flag of some way. And in terms of what would be in its pocket, but so, I mean, that's very good. But I don't know. I know that the ease of making work is important to me, that that I think I make work mostly for women. I mean, it isn't like I disregard men. You know, I have a lot of close friends. I have a brother who's on here now. I had a son who is on here. I have 2 sons. I mean, like I have friends who are men, definitely. Some of my closest in the world, Harry's there. But I think that I make this put in my pockets sort of like something where I think maybe has something to, I make little heroes of people. And so maybe if I have a pocket, I make like the women that I have in my work heroes. I think I make Diane a hero. She managed to survive. She's a hero, right? Everybody in my work is, not a jealous bone. Sophie was a hero. She killed her mother and she's alive. That woman's dead, but not Sophie. She's alive. You know, I may be old, but you're dead. Don't let being dead go to your head. You know, yeah. So I think that's what I try to do. I try to make. I didn't write that line. I was working in an old person's home, and this one guy who died was 6 feet, and he took the entire space up. It was the big body lying in the room, and I was an activities director for some of the poorest homes in Philadelphia when I was in my 20s, which did not help. I mean, maybe it did because it gave me a job for 10 years, but it was really was a struggle. And this one guy started dancing and he said, "Tough luck, Tom," his name. "Poor Tom, you are dead, but I am still alive. Poor Tom." And so I just took it and I went, "Poor Mom."
Do you walk around with a notebook and like write down?
I was never going to
that...
forget that. I was never going to forget that. No, that was one of those moments. People, first of all, somebody as huge as that doesn't just die like a beached whale. and then have somebody swinging their cane and dancing and making up a song about Tom. That was, I mean, I worked in nursing homes for a long time, even when they closed them, the government closed them down because they were just disgusting, and then brought them into other homes that were in comparison were really terrific. I mean, it was like going from, it's going from 0 to 100.
Right.
I think it's
Okay.
heroes, Noel. Heroes.
Heroes in the dress pocket. Great. So we've got someone called Sukrai or Shukrai. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing the name. Would you like to ask your question, or shall I read out? Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask it. I think it just makes it for a more interactive discussion. But if not, I'll read it out. Okay. So the question is.
Saying something too. Okay.
Okay. So the question is, your lo-fi imagery is amazing. Can you talk about that? Lo-fi.
Lo-fi.
Lo-fi. Yeah, I'm not certain.
I guess that means like stuff I find on Instagram. Or
yeah, I think the computer
well,
generated.
There's wonderful work there. I mean, this is all work that I just sort of found. In the beginning, I was just playing, you know, like to have a wolf. My son led an Alaskan trip into the wilderness, the Arctic. And so I took that and I put this wolf there. And I have this thing about wolves and dreams. In fact, it's just really weird. It's just like they just howl in my dreams. It's very weird. It's part of me that feels like I'm still feral, probably. Right. But I started playing with them and needed a background. So I imported his material in, and I started playing with these like low. No, they're really pretty. Some of them are so old that they just fall apart, like there's babies that are in this one scene in the beginning when I talk about my twin brother and me, that they're they're some of the early ones. They're, you know, I couldn't even find out who did them.
Right. Okay, so we've got a question. Nina, would you like to ask the question, or yeah, go ahead, please. Nina, by the way, Nina is the editor of my current film. She's a brilliant artist of her own, also works as an editor for Vice. So Nina, please go ahead.
Hey, hey Kamila, thank you. Hello Cecilia as well. Lovely to hear the conversation. Before I move on to the question, I just wanted to make a comment about possibly in Michigan, and about why I think maybe it kind of came out again as a film to have been seen by so many people. I would, in no means an expert, but I would sort of maybe place it in the second wave feminism, and with the rise of third wave feminism, with the Gen Z being very active online, and with the sort of, I think, potentially see quite some similarities between the kind of the baby boomers and the Gen Z being sort of like active activists on like acting upon the things that possibly annoys them in their reality. And another thing with the kind of YouTube algorithms, I thought that the way how they work is whenever something's shocking, they kind of push it forward. So regardless of what your opinions are, regardless of what kind of things you're interested in, you will get the stuff that gets the most amount of emotions, because what they want is your kind of physical reaction. So if something has a strong reaction online, or is kind of seen as something that people talk about, they will just push it. And that could be one of the things why it became so prominent online. But yeah, leaving that film aside, and then moving on to We Were Hardly More Than Children, because I think that it was quite interesting what you said about you having the nightmares about blood for 7 years after that. 7 years is also obviously a very important number in here, because apparently every 7 years we have brand new cells, which is, you know, one of those things that people talk about, some scientists have mentioned. But the question is, did you find the making of this film cathartic in any way?
I was
surprised. Question, yeah.
I thought it's interesting. I know. I can't say that I actually felt it cathartic. I mean, maybe I did. I didn't know that it would have such an impact on me. It really floored me. I very rarely get like lost, you know, like lost in work. But when Diane told me that I could use her story and her name and identify her, I went into this strange world where I went, I made this film and I believe in it, but it's not the film I would have made. And I kind of went into a mourning about that. I felt so sad that I hadn't made the film that I could have made or would have made, or, you know, like all those silly things. And then I came out of it and I went, it's all I have to do is say one line, a couple lines, which is what Kamila had said, that, you know, she doesn't remember, Diane doesn't remember. And so, but for her, Diane, I think it was really, it opened up a lot of things because she didn't remember. But for me, I remember, I think there's other things that I don't remember, but I remember the blood. But I found I could say blood 4 times. And if I said it more than that, people couldn't stand it. And yet, honest to God, I didn't mention that I had blood sitting on me when I was sitting in the waiting room, right? There was none of this stuff that was, you know, covering me. I just made it seem like these doctors called out and called me a murderer. I didn't say that I look like a murderer, right? Yeah. So there's, that part was big. And then I started connecting that this landscapes filled with blood was back to that. I couldn't go out for a week after that. I tried, I walked to school and I was a student, and I went like, well, got half a block. It's time to turn around and go back. Right. And that was, but I realized when I made it that this trauma of women and violence had actually started much earlier, besides childhood, than I had realized.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Cecilia. We've got perhaps a time for a final remark.
Kathy, I see Kathy Woodward right there.
That's
she
right.
had her hand.
Okay. Right. Okay. So Kathy, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, it actually
Great.
is more of a remark, as I
Wonderful.
mentioned. Let me just say, my name's Kathy Woodward. I'm at the University of Washington in Seattle. And I know Cecilia from being one of her colleagues when I was at the University of Wisconsin. So a long history with Cecilia's work. And I just want to say I was inspired by Nwala's question about pockets, to think about within a stone's throw, which is not something we're discussing, but I think is very important to the kind of evolution of Cecilia's work. And within a stone's throw, for those of you who know it, you know rocks are central. Yes. Rocks are central. And I'm reminded of a comment in, it's either Annie Lloyd or O Rapunzel, when you say, I collect stories, mother's stories, I just need to find them. And within a stone's throw, you are collecting rocks. And you're not putting them in your pockets, which Virginia Woolf did tragically as she drowned herself, weighted down by rocks. You're collecting them in your dress, and the rocks become a companion to you. And so my question, in a sense, is, what are you collecting? And when you're collecting things, you're creating iconography that accompanies you in life. And some of it is very difficult and painful, but some of it is also very reassuring. And this image of you in Ireland collecting these rocks, which become your companions, is just so striking and wonderful. So what you collect, I think, is a foundational question for you.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that I seem to collect chairs in my work, right? That they go like this, or they go in the water, you know.
Really? I don't remember that.
Yeah, he's mentioned it. So I feel like there's things that I are continually have, like rocks are definitely in, like Annie Lloyd, they're in, Rapunzel there. It's the earth actually that I, you know, like for me, I mean, the shopping malls and parking lots are all this stuff that's like takes over the earth. And so I'm always making a little bit of a background political story in terms of environment by showing like a parking lot. I mean, I don't do it, it's not part of it, but it's part of the world. I feel if I start making environmental work, I know that it's not good. You know, I've tried, you know, it's not good. But I know that that was the first time I was ever alone. That was the first time I was in it, and I was out on the Burren with nothing but rocks. And I felt like I'd done Annie Lloyd, and my mother had died, and like I was turning to stone. I could see that this was a transition that was simply powerful as can be for me. And I didn't know how to be. I didn't know how to be without her. Not that she was a great mother. She just took this pill she thought was she just got a lot nicer when she started taking certain medicine. Right.
Kathleen, that was interesting what you said about Cecilia collecting things, because I actually had an idea for when Cecilia gets her big retrospective, which I'm sure will happen soon. I wanted to kind of have a little quiz about what is the common denominator to a lot of Cecilia's work, because there's one particular thing that appears in almost every film. And I'm not going to say that now, because should that retrospective happen, I'm going to keep that question. But there's one element that appears in all the films but one so far. So Cecilia, maybe I'll tell you after. You can tell me whether you agree or not. Well, it's there. But in any case, we have last question that I think would be really good
to rotate images, though. I know
you do, and also, you know, there is some self-referential material in the work as well. There's some images from your previous work that appears in your work, but in different films. But perhaps we have time for one last question, and this is a question from Petra. And if Petra wants to ask the question herself, I'll give 3 seconds. Petra, would you like to ask the question, or you want me to read it out? Okay, I shall read it out then. Okay. Shall I read out? Or... No, okay,
sorry,
go ahead, please.
I haven't gotten used to using Zoom. So it's
okay, please, but go ahead and ask the question, yes.
Like, how could a younger person like pursue becoming an artist and like making works in like a more creative and expressive way? Because like when I try to look for what to do, well, after I graduate, if I should study or work, and it's all the options I have, they're all very commercial and very like, oh, you gotta go to this job and you gotta do what they say. You can't do like what you want to do, which I understand, it's normal, and like that's how work is. And I'm not trying to be like, oh, I don't want to work, I just want to do what I want to do, but I just don't know how to take a step to like go into that direction more.
You see, teacher, I'll tell you what it is that because I was raised with some poverty, and I knew I could not be an artist if I had to think about food and money. I couldn't have stood it. My brother was a painter, and he couldn't stand it, and he was so gifted. And I don't think I had to make sure that I had money, or else I would worry that I wouldn't have food. And so the little thing goes, you just like one domino effect after another. And so I think that making a living is one of the things that I took me a while to figure out. I worked with, again, in nursing homes as an activities director, and I worked for a chain of them, which at the time was a big chain. But I thought I could do it well, and I could manage to be somebody who could make a living that way. And then I found I could apply to a college, and I heard there was college, and I'm epileptic, so I couldn't work full time. And so I had to work 3 days a week. And if I worked more than that, it was really trouble. And I can do it for a while, but I can't do it for long. I couldn't do it. So I found that money is like one of the biggest issues in terms of being an artist. And I chose teaching because I thought I could teach 3 days a week. And then if I was home as grad director, I was always working, but I could work at home. I didn't have to put on that face or that dress that was a professional face or professional clothing. I could just be me and nobody would see me. And so I could do my job, right? So that was very important to me. But I know, I understand that making a living is one of the biggest, I thought it was for me, it was the single biggest thing about being an artist I had to figure out.
Yeah, but I think Petra is also pointing out something super interesting about the, I suppose, educational system, that increasingly universities really focus on more commercial programs because these are the programs that, of course, also bring money, right? So there's increasingly a decrease in the size of experimental programs or film schools that are attached to fine art programs, where we've been, I've been teaching too, and I think that's Petra, that's unfortunately something that's been happening for a long time, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the future of that is. And I think nowadays, at least, we live in a connected enough world on the one hand where, hopefully Zoom conversations like this and work being made available online does offer some exposure to different ways of working and, different styles and methods of working, such as, Cecilia is a brilliant example. But I also agree, I don't remember which filmmaker it was that was asked at the Q&A somewhere at the British Film Institute many years ago by a student, what advice do you have to young filmmakers? And he said, get a day job. That was basically what he said, that, without that support, it's indeed very difficult. But yes, I think we've got to close on this remark. Cecilia, would you like to say something? But I just would like to say thank you to all of you for being here tonight. Thank you, Cecilia, to your wonderful work, continuous inspiration. And thank you to Ann Arbor Film Festival for actually having me 2 years ago when we first met. Yes. And then to Tessa Garland, who I think, reached out to me and then actually proposed that we do this event. So thank you. And Cecilia, if you want to say a couple of words, then.
Well, I appreciate you plugging in, and it's really nice to see faces I know and faces that I don't know. I think I know, but I don't really know. At least I work or like I know this and that. So I'm thankful. Thanks.
Yes, and I think we've had a wonderful audience tonight. And again, thank you very much, everybody, and have a lovely evening and wonderful weekend. And thank you, Cecilia, again, and good night.
Bye.